Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Log In Audio Out podcast. I'm your host, Hugo, and I'm here with my co host, Taylor. Say hi, Taylor.
Hello.
And today we have another reoccurring guest. Say hi, Eric.
How's it going, everybody?
So, today we actually have a very special topic today we're talking about, where I think this is going to be our most informative type of topics we're gonna go on. It is going to be focusing on the concept of PC building. Now, with everyone has their own form of playing video games or their own taking a cup of tea, but a lot of it is always originated from computers. Yet, oddly enough, I would like to still think that is the most popular form to play video games. It is what originated, it's what's still around. Though I do think the medium has changed to where now obviously people think of video games as more related to handhelds or consoles. But at the end of the day, those are also just glorified computers if you think about it. And this kind of goes into the next thing of people constantly try to mention to building a PC, but it isn't always the easiest per se. And the purpose of this podcast is for anyone who wants to get into that and to want to try to look into like what the do's and don'ts and what would be best advice for it. Now, Eric, I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about yourself, so why we chose you as our big informative guest on this topic.
So, first of all, thank you for having me back, and thank you for considering me the person to be your local expert on the topic. That is very much appreciated. But yeah, so the short of it is that when I was like 4 years old, my step grandfather on my mom's side, he was an engineer, and so of course he had a fancy, nice computer. When I was a little kid, I'd spend a lot of time over there. He'd let me play with it. He showed me how to use a mouse and a keyboard. He showed me how, clicking this thing makes this thing happen on the screen. And, that kind of got it started. My dad got a very nice home computer. And then he started showing me how to put, discs in, floppies, CDs, and, type in the DOS commands to run them before Windows was properly a thing. And that was like the mid-90s. And I was like maybe 8 years old. I think it was 2002, 2003, when my dad took me to a computer convention in Rosemont. And there they had a bunch of booths where you could pick, they're referred to as quote-unquote boutique computer builders, or system integrators. And basically you pick the parts you want, they assemble it for you, and they set it up, and then you take it home, like right there. And so my dad and he showed me how to maintain the whole thing, just on daily basis. Anytime, I didn't know how to do something that we needed to do with it, he'd be like, hey, come here, let me show you this. And I picked up stuff and didn't even realize I was learning. So in the meantime, he was also giving me bit by bit some of his old work laptops, like super outdated Compaq machines. They're complete garbage by today's standard, but back then they were, average. So that was really cool, right? Over the years, we just got more and more computer stuff, right? You slowly upgrade as, a pretty typical middle class family. And we eventually got DSL internet, which allowed me to play games online. But also I was able to use the Google, as the old folks refer to it as. So then I think it was around 2009 and 2010, my grandfather passed away on my dad's side, and I used some of the money he left me to build myself the most banging computer I could possibly put together. I had a buddy of mine. He and I spec'd the whole thing out, and I put the money down, and then we built it. And man, that thing was screaming fast for the time. And so that was my first build from scratch. But since then, I have just spent more and more time every year, looking, keeping up to date with new hardware, new software, new, prototypes that are coming out in the news, and just kind of following everything. It's not even my career to do so. I'm not a journalist. I'm not, a PC builder by trade. But it is certainly a very important thing to me, and I have done computer contracting, so it has made me money.
Interesting, interesting. Well, I'm glad to see you actually had a very good background in terms of computers, and I think not many people got kind of get that experience,
I was very lucky and privileged, yes.
which I think is the more the purpose of this video, where I think it's we want to enlighten more people to get into PC building and why it's always more important to get more involved with machinery of this caliber, because I think from a public perspective, it's very, very intimidating.
Absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. So I think I actually have a series of questions if you don't mind me asking.
Go for it.
So what is the first thing someone should really consider when buying or building a PC? And should they have a budget in mind or some type of plan?
So basically, what I tell most people is, first of all, the biggest misconception I hear is, oh, I need like $1,000, right? I need like a $1,500 budget. No, not even close. Um, you build your PC to fit your budget. So basically, what I have most people do is I ask them, what are you using it for? Are you going to be doing video games? Are you going to be streaming? Are you going to be 3D modeling, or are you going to be doing audio production, video editing, you name it? And then I ask them, okay, what's your budget? And I'm like, okay, what are you reasonably and comfortably able to spend without breaking the bank or going way too overboard, and you're going to suffer later, right? Don't want to be eating ramen every day for 3 months. And then once I have their budget and their use case, then I spec the computer out to meet that. Um, so a budget is nice, but also it helps to understand what a reasonable cost for parts is, so you can budget without going too high, too low, or whatever. Um,
If you can give like an average price, like I think like say today from today's standards, what would you recommend?
So if you're looking to play like the hottest AAA titles at the highest graphics, Cyberpunk 2077, or you know, any of the I'm trying to think of all the other, like all the fancy shooters and stuff coming out,
Mm-hmm.
everything coming out these days. You're gonna need probably about a grand to $1,200 or so.
Mm-hmm.
But that's to push the graphics to the limit, right? That's going all the way, and that's without fancy cooling systems. If you're looking to just go kind of middle of the road, like I want to play some indie games, I want to make it kind of like an office computer, or okay, I do want to play a couple of AAA games, but they don't have to be the highest graphics settings. You can pay probably anywhere in the range of like 500 to 750 and be totally fine, which all things considered, you're paying about 550 for a brand new console before, you start buying games and peripherals. So, it's not really that different. Difference being, you can customize it, you can pick what parts you want. You're building it to spec.
Okay, this is actually a question for Taylor then, because I know you're someone on this podcast who mentions a lot of like indie games, and actually
Hmm.
you're our usual go-to PC person. I was
Yeah.
wondering like, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh no, continue.
I was just wondering like, what's your opinion like on your build per se, or how would you handle?
Yeah, so I have only built a PC once, and I think I went about it in not necessarily the best way possible, but for me at the time, it was what I was comfortable with. I just like I went online, I found someone had like specced something out, and I was like, I am just going to copy that exactly, and I am going to follow the YouTube tutorial because I also didn't have anyone to help me. So I was like, if I can like visually see every single step, then hopefully I can understand and make it happen. And I did. Like it was hard at times where I just felt like I don't understand the mistake I'm making. And then when I realized the mistake I was making, like the so I think my biggest advice around this is if you do have someone in your life where you can find someone who has experience, they can usually help you with those troubleshooting things way faster than trying to find that information on the internet, because there's a lot of like as with all things, the internet is full of good information and not so great information. Um, So I don't have that PC anymore. I game on my sad old Razer laptop. And I've been thinking about building a PC because I think I'm at the point where I need to do that. But also, what I've been doing over the past few years is for the library, we have been buying desktops that aren't necessarily like the greatest, but we're using them for our gaming computers, and then we're just buying a better graphics card, an SSD drive, and swapping out parts to make them better. So we're not necessarily like we can't build from scratch for every single library that we're serving, but we can swap out a couple things and make a really good PC. So that is also, I think, a way to go to get started, right? Understanding like what one component does and how it fits in the build is sort of where I am now and where I feel comfortable.
Amazing. Thank you on that. I guess this kind of goes into our next question then. So when say you have a budget in mind for a PC, and say you want to go shop for a PC, whether online or in person, you see a lot of these setups from companies that already have a PC pre-built for a convenience factor, and then but a lot of the stigma is, oh, you should just build your PC. It's cheaper. It's better. Yet my question is it really better? Like, what are the pros and cons of getting a from building your own computer to getting like a pre-built from a company at a store?
So I love this question, especially from well, Taylor mentioned it, the idea of taking an existing computer that is already built and, modifying it in some way. That is extremely common and is the budget builder's best friend, especially for the lower end of gaming on PC. Um, so pre-builts are actually great. And I don't say that from the perspective of like, oh, they're like the best value, or they're going to be the most hardcore computer you're going to get. I say that from the perspective of, there's three cases in which I would tell somebody to buy a pre-built, and none of these are bad. One is I need a computer right the heck now. I need the computer yesterday. I need someone to just plug it in, boot it up, and have it just works. For whatever reason, right? Maybe your old computer broke and you have some stuff you need to get done, or you are that desperate to play Apex Legends with your best friend. Um, you know, pick your reason, right? Because you can always modify it whatever later. Number two is you are just absolutely and totally that afraid of frying or ruining any component in your computer, which is a valid and totally fair fear. That is a completely understandable concern, especially for somebody who is extremely inexperienced, because inexperience doesn't mean ineptitude. It just means you don't have the experience. Um, so if you're afraid of it, then you know what? Just go with the pre-built. Figure it out later. Learn it along the way. YouTube is a good buddy to have if you know where to look. Google, kind of the same. Yeah, you're gonna have some misleads along the way and some misinformation, but ultimately you'll probably find your way there.
Yeah, because when I've considered trying to build a PC or even like getting into that type of market, I always thought at some point like, why do all this research? Why not just try to do like a little bit of research, get a PC at the store, pick it up, and call it a day, just like a video game console.
Right. And so that kind of brings in my third point. In the rare circumstance the individual components are in low supply or excessively high demand or both. Um, and that stuff is usually in the case of, well, two particular cases in recent memory. The Bitcoin mining craze of 2017, where basically you couldn't get any graphics cards above the $100 range, which is the good ones. Um, and so people were resorting to pre-built computers from Best Buy to get any graphics card they could. So they'd buy the computer, scrap basically the rest of the computer, then yank the graphics card. The other case is that this year COVID-19 shut down the world. and that includes electronics and computer component manufacturing companies. So supply was ridiculously low for most components, and then especially graphics cards coming out of quarantine and whatnot. Even when factories were starting back up, they had a lot of back orders to fill. So, I mean, yeah, there are some cases where a pre-built is absolutely the way to go. Any of these three or more, there might be more reasons. These are the ones that I consider the most prevalent. So, I mean, yeah, if that fits you, listener, I mean, by all means, I'm not gonna knock you for it.
Yeah, so I think thank both you and Taylor for giving that perspective. I think getting a pre-built or a built can definitely has its own pros and cons, and I think it just varies and depending on the situation. Then, from what I'm understanding,
Mm-hmm.
and then of course there's always like the unique ability like where you can't do with consoles. You can upgrade your computer if you're tech savvy enough. But okay, I guess it goes. I want to go into my next question. It's and it kind of goes with like parts per se, where I
Okay.
know you what's necessarily better in terms of parts? Would you rather buy a new part straight off the store, or would you want to get one from like an online store or like from someone else? And is there like a market for that?
So once again, I'll say it depends. Um, so with pre-builts, you're getting all new parts, right?
Hmm.
Um, if you're buying your parts from a dedicated vendor or whatever, you're not getting new parts. Um, but you don't always have to buy new parts. I tell people if you have the money for new parts, go for it just for the peace of mind of okay, I have a part that I know is working and has a valid warranty. Um, but if you want to save some money, and you know where you're buying from, and you can trust where you're getting your parts from, by all means, go used. I recommend in particular not buying a used power supply, hard drive, or like computer mouse, just because those tend to have the most internal wear and tear on them, and you never really know what you're getting. There could be latent damage that even the current owner, doesn't know about. Similar with buying a car or car parts, you just don't know. Um, but the things that are safe to buy used usually are the processor, CPU, or the graphics card, your RAM, your motherboard, and in some cases your solid state storage. And I'll define all those terms for you guys later, what they mean. Um, but all this comes with an asterisk, right? Make sure you know where you're buying from. Be it a good friend of yours, a family member, or say for example, eBay is really touch and go. You never really know with eBay. Um, but places like Reddit has a subreddit called Hardware Swap, and they have a reputation system baked right in to their whole setup. So if anybody flakes out on a sale or sells a dead component or whatever, they get flagged for it, and they get a lot of flack. So with that kind of stuff, you can generally trust that you're going to get something good because the people on the other end don't want to be chased off the whole subreddit. Um, so yeah, buying used is fine. Just again with that little asterisk.
Okay. I have a question for Taylor then, because I know in your previous
Okay.
statement you mentioned that you copied an entire build like
Yeah.
from the internet. I was wondering like how did you yourself acquire the parts?
I think I bought them new. Yeah, for my first build, I was like, I don't even know how to tell if something used is good used or not used. So I bought them new. Pretty much entirely through Newegg. Um, which was very helpful. I feel like they give a lot of information on Newegg that's very helpful. I mean, they're not the only game in town, but
Is it
that's how I went about it.
what is Newegg? I actually have never heard of that site before.
It is, a tech superstore website.
Hmm.
I pretty much any component
Hmm.
you can think of, you are going to find on Newegg. Yeah. And they
Interesting.
also have a lot of advice on Newegg and a lot of good reviews from people who are, doing this. I think, you can always you can find a lot of the components on Amazon. But I like Newegg because there are a lot of really in-depth reviews from people who have actually used these components to build computers.
Okay. And from what I'm hearing from both of you guys, the online community is very supportive in terms of helping newbies trying to get into PC or just trying to build with certain parts. And
Oh
I think
yeah, absolutely.
has it always been the case, or is it just something growing within the past few years?
Um, that's a tough question actually, because most of my education earlier on came from family members and friends who, I was already familiar with them. They were patient with me because we were familiar, so that I had kind of the benefit there. Um, but any learning I didn't do with family or friends was just YouTube videos and articles. So, having no person to interact with, but just seeing a face or reading a bunch of words kind of changed my learning experience from what I would assume is the norm, which, people more often than not are interacting in forums and talking amongst other peers that they're not exactly, close friends or acquaintances with.
Interesting. All right.
Yeah,
I think
I built my computer several years ago, and I can already tell that the community is much more built out now. My partner, uh, he has been building PCs for a very long time, since he was in high school. And we're old. Uh, so this was in the very early days of the internet, using AIM Messenger, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so I know a lot of sort of his experience in learning was lots of tinkering, of taking things apart, kind of learning, because there wasn't this vast resource that is the internet. So if
Mm-hmm.
anything, it is so much easier now. So much less tinkering has to be done because a lot of people have done it before you and have recorded that information.
okay. Then I guess this could go into our next question is how much time and effort kind of usually goes into building a PC, and what would you say be the biggest challenges in building one?
Another question that I love, because go back just 15 years, and it's funny that I can even say that. I feel old. Um, so go back 15 years, and you had to worry so much more about compatibility, and all these other little minutia of whether the parts are going to fit together and whether they're going to work together. Are you going to get the best performance out of combining this part with that part, or what have you? But nowadays, it's kind of just spelled out for you. I refer to a lot of computer components as adult Legos, Legos with electricity running through them, because everything is slotted to fit one way, and if it's not fitting, okay, you're either inserting it wrong or it's not meant to go there. So take a closer look, and you'll know which one it is. As for actually time to complete a physical build, um, with practice, I've got it down to 20 minutes. It does not take much time at all if you know what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing, it can take a little while, but you're never going to blow more than 4 hours on it, really, unless you really have some serious troubleshooting to do. Such as when I built my most recent computer, which was 2015. I had a small little error in the software that interfaces the operating system and the motherboard, kind of the bridge between them. And I started my computer build at about 8 p.m., and I didn't get to bed until about 10 a.m. But that's because I was very determined to figure out this darn problem before I went to sleep. Um,
Okay.
so, my girlfriend had passed out at my place waiting for me to finish. And I had a buddy over that was also just kind of watching and hanging out, and he passed out long ago as well. So they were conked out on the other side of the room, and I was just like, I'm gonna finish it. I looked like a friggin' crazy scientist, frazzled hair, and my 5 o'clock shadow was more of a midnight shadow, and good times, good times.
Then I guess I also want to ask you is what are the key parts to building a PC? Where what does each part do per se? If you can give a little TLDR on it.
Okay, let me scroll around in my notes here because I wrote down some short-term explanations of this. So basically, your CPU, your processor, that is the part of your computer that just does stuff. It intakes data, it processes it, and it spits out whatever information on the other side. Be that data to send to to storage or whatever. Everything goes through the processor. Um, Generally speaking, there's obviously more information behind it, but generally speaking, computer or your processor and your performance for your general computer will be determined by the amount of cores in your processor and how fast those cores are rated. There's a lot of fine details to knowing how all that fits together and what it all means. But generally speaking, within a realm of reasonability, more cores and faster cores are better. 20 years ago, having a computer with 2 cores was overkill. Nowadays, 2 cores isn't going to be anything for you, and most cell phones have at least 4 cores. And then the motherboard is kind of what stitches all the parts together. It is the central interface by which you connect all the other components of the computer so they can talk to the processor and each other and everything you need to do between components. Again, more detail there, but that's the basics of it. Your RAM, or random access memory, is like the processor's short-term memory. Think of it as the more memory you have, the more stuff you can do while multitasking. It's just temporary storage of all the necessary information the processor will need to get stuff done. My favorite analogy for it is it's like a desk, in the sense that if you have a bigger desk in your office, you can spread out more papers and more stuff, and you can multitask a lot better because you can look at individual piles of things and see what's where and use it all faster, rather than having to pull it out, put stuff away, and move stuff around more often. Your hard drive, or in the case of using a solid state drive, those are just your storage mediums. That's where all your data goes. Pictures, movies, text files, music, all of it. That's where your stuff gets stored. So any installation of your software also goes there, but that can vary a little bit. The power supply is something that I get a lot of misconception about. Power supply is just a power plant. It yanks from the wall whatever the computer components ask for in terms of electricity. It's just a delivery mechanism. The common misconception people give me about this one is, oh, you have this big a power supply? That's going to fry your computer. No, it doesn't pump in as much juice as it can. It only gives what it is asked to give. Kind of like a bank teller, right? You have a certain amount of money in your bank account, and you say, hey, I want to take out $500. Power supply goes, okay, I have $700. Here's $500. You have $200 left over. Pretty straightforward. The case or the chassis is just where everything goes inside. That's what contains all your parts, holds them together. And then lastly, you have your graphics card, which is going to do all of your visual processing for the computer. There are some exceptions to the case where sometimes they have graphics cards built into like CPUs, but they're not going to be nearly as good because they don't have enough space to fit all the technology there. So the graphics card is just going to do all of your visual stuff, 3D, 2D, text output. Everything you see on your screen is being processed by the graphics card.
Okay. So what would you kind of claim as like the most important parts you want to focus on in terms of playing video games with a PC? Because my assumption from what I'm getting is maybe like the motherboard, power supply, and the graphics card.
So that's a tough one. Only because there's no right or wrong answer for that one. The higher your budget, the more high fidelity and high quality and performance parts you're going to buy. But by and large, you kind of want to get a good balance of them all, especially if you're gaming, because you want to get a power supply that can sustain the electrical load of delivering all that power to your components. Your processor, you want to get something that can, make sure it keeps up with what the game needs to run, because there's so many things a game needs to do per second, and you need your processor to be able to do them, right?
Mm-hmm.
The RAM and memory, you need to be able to have all the temporary files the game needs to run there, so that the processor and graphics card can access those files. Your storage needs to be up to date so you can actually have the game installed and not eat up all of your storage, and so things can access it fast enough. And then your graphics card, you need to have usually a decent one, because games, surprise, have a lot of graphics. So you have to have something on your computer that can output all the graphics at a decent level of fidelity.
Mm-hmm. So we're talking a lot about parts, and a lot of them can either be used or new. Is there any certain brands you'd recommend to try to specifically go for this certain part, or anything that seems like, I guess, the best in terms of gameplay or technology? Because I can think of a few brands where I know I can reiterate what Taylor said, where she got like a lot. She got like Razer stuff, like from Razer. That's I think it's a generic brand. Maybe Logitech, just stuff I'm listing off the top of my head where I'm not very tech savvy myself.
So I'll be honest with you. By the time the viewers and / listeners hear this, the answer might change. And this is in my notes, but basically, there is such a regular and frequent fluctuation of what companies are on top, which companies have the most forward marching technology, and which companies have the most reliable things. Like, there was recently a graphics card launch, and these third-party manufacturers that normally I would trust, 2 or 3 of them put in some really shoddy components in their graphics cards, and so it was frying users' graphics cards. And these are companies that normally I'd never expect to do that, but they cheaped out. And so I don't want to say any particular brands, because I don't want to have to eat my foot later. Be like, well, okay, I said that. Somebody bought one of those parts and then it fried their whole computer. Oh, that's awkward. That makes me look pretty bad, huh? So, I mean, generally speaking, just go by reviews. If you're buying new, or even if you're buying used, go look at reviews of new components. Look at how people are talking about them. See what reviewers are saying, both on YouTube and forums and, writing in articles. There's tons of websites I could recommend. The list is too long to verbally spit it all out. But just pay attention to what reviews are out there and go by that at the time. Because, again, what I say now could be completely invalid within a week.
Okay. Taylor, this is actually a question for you then, because I feel like you're definitely more on the consumer perspective as well.
Mm-hmm. I don't know that I have any particular suggestions. I think just look at reviews. There isn't, one brand that is better than the rest. There's a lot of options, and even within those brands, there are a lot of options. So look at reviews and do your research. I think in all of this, do your research before you make a decision on what you're getting for your build.
Awesome. Okay. I guess I'll go into our next question, because you mentioned that is that aside from building a PC, we also technically have to have the right programs per se. How does technically the digital side of having a computer work when you're assembling it? Because I would think, oh, you're building all these computer parts, but do they even necessarily do anything if you don't know how to your way around certain programs?
That's a really, really I guess, important question. And a lot of people don't consider this, especially for new builders. But what most people would expect to put in their computer is Windows. Windows is one of many operating systems. Well, what the heck is an operating system, right? The operating system is in its basest form, right? On the lowest level, it is software that runs software that runs software that runs software that runs software. So it's basically a container for software. It knows what to do with things. And it knows how to execute code. So it's the framework that you put, you put in a computer that tells the computer, on a high level, here's what to do with literally everything. So the common ones that everybody knows are Windows, Apple's Mac OS X, and Linux, with millions of different versions of Linux. And those are the most common ones. Each one has their benefits and drawbacks, of course. It's kind of a double-edged sword, no matter which one you pick. But each one does things a little bit differently, albeit with the same goal in mind, and that is just to run your software. So Windows and Linux work on basically everything. Mac OS X is kind of tied to Apple hardware with some exceptions. And if you want me to elaborate on like specific pieces of software that aren't like the operating system, I can by all means do that as well.
I mean, sure. If anything, keep it like beginner friendly. Of like, how would you go about it? If
Yeah.
like say for me, like I don't know anything about PCs per se, so I think that would definitely be enlightening.
Yeah. So I mean, you pick your operating system based on what you need to do, right? Linux is probably one of the most flexible, just because you can, most people who pick Linux, it's free, which is great. So you can try it and discard it or use it further if you want. But it also has the steepest learning curve. But once you have that learned, it's that thing is a beast. Windows is the most flexible in the sense of most things are programmed for Windows. So be it video games or like any kind of creation software for music, movies, video, whatever, 3D modeling. Most of that stuff is made for Windows. And Mac OS X for Apple stuff is usually made with complete and total ease of access and ease of use in mind. It's the most straightforward. It does what you need it to do, albeit within these direct constraints. As for software that runs inside of those operating systems, I mean, you can do anything with software, right? It's just a matter of figuring out how. People make tons of amazing pieces of software out there. Some of them cost thousands of dollars. Some of them cost nothing. There's a lot of free pieces of software out there that have a lot of similar features to the free stuff or to the expensive stuff. Just does it in a different way. Maybe it's a little less efficient. Maybe it's not as fast. Pick your poison, basically. But when it comes to putting software on your computer, obviously you got to be careful about it. You don't download from a shady site. You don't, click from a website that has a billion download now buttons. And, you basically get the software that you need. So if you're, say you're a professional and you're working on, high tier movie production, you're working for a Hollywood studio, you're likely going to pay a lot of money for high performance, high fidelity software, and of course have a computer to match. But if you're, an average Joe, or even, as we jokingly call them, prosumers, consumers that want to be professionals, or have, need for professional software, there are free or cheap alternatives to those expensive pieces of software that are honestly just as good for your use case. You can get basically everything free. It's just a matter of, do you need the expensive version? Probably not.
Awesome. Well, okay, I guess let's go into my next question, and that goes into like maintenance for a PC. Say you have a PC for a while and it's going well. What's the best way to kind of maintain it from being like the top pristine condition that you want and make sure it's still up and running even like say months or even years afterwards?
So maintenance is super easy these days. You got to hand it to the engineers and designers and developers of hardware and software as well, because they've kind of made it. They've learned, obviously, over the past 2, 3, technically 4 decades, that to use a computer shouldn't be hard. You shouldn't have to manually do a billion things yourself. Um, so, with hardware, just dust it out every few months. If you live in a particularly dusty area, maybe every 2 months. But what I tell most people to do is, take your computer outside and blast it with compressed air. That's all you got to do. It'll blow all the dust out. It has somewhere to go that's not inside your house, apartment, loft, whatever. And it's going to keep it clean. So clean computers run cool. Cool computers last longer. Your heating is kind of important. Not as much these days because a lot of things have overheating protection. But as long as your computer's not dusty, you're fine. On the software side, uh, most operating systems will take care of the cleaning it up on its own. I know Windows has a built-in kind of, I don't want to, I guess I call it tool, tools that use themselves. But it's basically got built-in features and functions that keep everything kind of cleaned up and working right under the hood. So if you put it in sleep mode or you leave your computer for like half an hour, it's going to do little things in the background to keep itself running clean and optimized. And I know Windows is actually a little bit behind on that because Mac OS X has had that forever. And Linux has been implementing that for quite a while as well. So, yeah, a lot of the software does it itself. The only thing I can say is make sure your stuff is up to date. And the only asterisk/warning on that is with major operating system updates, no matter which platform you're on, Linux, Windows, OS X, uh, when you see a major update come out or is ready to install, don't automatically click go and install it. Defer it for a couple weeks and wait to see if you see anything in the news that says, "Hey, something's wrong with this update," because the manufacturers or the software developers might redact that. Be like, "Oops, guys, we messed up. There's this piece of code that does not work right. We need to revise this and then relaunch it to the users." It's really rare, but it happens every so often. So I just recommend that people do that anyway.
I've seen that happen both in consoles as well, where I think like certain updates kind of brick their consoles at
Yep.
times. So I think I think it was very smart for you to mention that, since I guess it doesn't happen to just consoles. I guess since consoles are glorified computers in a way, if you think about it.
Just highly specialized, yeah.
Awesome. Okay, I guess that actually that was a much simpler way I thought on maintaining computers. Thank you. My next question would be, aside from just the actual computer components itself, what importance does accessories apply to it? I'm talking like monitor, keyboard, mouse. Where do they play a role in terms of the setup? I kind of want to start off with Taylor, if she can give her opinion on this.
Yeah, I am a big fan of having a good monitor, right? Because you have to have a monitor to show off like what your awesome graphics card can do, right? So, I think it's, you don't have to go crazy. You don't have to get like an insane, like souped up monitor, but get something of a good size. Like, my partner has one that's like a curved one that's just the best. And I'm actually a huge fan of having a dual monitor setup too.
I have 3.
Yeah, I highly recommend if you have the space for it, it will change the way that you use your computer for the better. So, big fan of monitors.
I think
Uh,
that's one of the few advantages that I think PCs have over just the regular
yeah.
computers in general, because I think we're also just regularly accustomed to just one screen only.
Yeah, I actually just had one of my interns who is thinking about building a computer. Or no, it wasn't. I can't remember what he was actually doing, but he asked me. He was like, "Should I just like hook this up to my TV or get a monitor?" And I'm like, "Get a monitor. Don't just hook it up to your TV. Like your TV's great, but that's not what it's designed to do." So
Really? I always
yeah.
thought that monitors kind of focus on like they're just like a smaller TV per se.
There's a lot of optimizations made to work with computers that make them better for PC use. Yeah, a TV is going to get you by. Even like the high end, like high refresh rate, high resolution monitors are going to be generally okay. But if you want to get the best experience out of your computer, you really do want to hook it up to a monitor. It's not mandatory, but you're doing yourself a favor.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Then I guess in this case, let's go into audio. Like I guess what's I guess headphones plan to play? Would you prefer speakers? I guess what are the pros and cons of going for each?
I think a lot of it's preference.
Hmm.
How you play, there are certain games where I want headphones and like some nice noise canceling headphones because it makes me feel a little bit more like I'm in the world of the
You're
game.
immersed, yeah.
Yeah, I'm immersed. But then there are times where I want speakers playing. I think it's really going to be a preference thing. So I don't think one is necessarily better than the other. Um, yeah, I will say with keyboard, get yourself a mechanical keyboard because they're the best and they make clicky sounds. And then you can delve into the whole world of mechanical keyboards and all of the nerdiness within that world, which I really love.
It's
And
so funny how that's come full circle
Yeah.
because way back when, 20, 30 years ago, keyboards were only mechanical. And then companies started making these cheap mass-produced rubber dome switches underneath keyboards or underneath keys. And now, companies and, designers are realizing, "Oh my God, why did we ever stop this? What were we doing?"
here I thought it was just a satisfying like noise fidget thing that
Nope,
kind of
it's a
made it popular.
completely different manufacturing process,
Yeah.
totally different function underneath the hood.
Okay, then I guess my question is, how does it make it better than I guess a traditional keyboard?
Um, so how do I explain that one? Basically, so again, mechanical keyboards were the original back in the day. And then what we know nowadays as quote unquote the standard is what we've been told is the standard. But the difference being basically there's under rubber dome, as they're referred to, a standard keyboard. There's underneath every switch or every key is like a springy rubber dome. And that rubber dome connects two little electrical contacts, and that determines, okay, a key has been pressed. Computer receives that signal. It basically completes a circuit for that specific key. Mechanical keyboards use a mechanical switch, usually with like proper springs and mechanical. I'm trying to describe the mechanisms, but inside, and we'd be here a while. I don't have anything concise
No, but
to describe that, but basically it uses a more mechanical and it just uses more parts to have a more machinery type situation going on where it doesn't man.
no, I think you're fine. I think you definitely
Yeah,
gave a good explanation on
it
how.
still bridges a gap and sends a signal, but that signal is not only once you have fully bottomed out the key to make contact between 2 points.
Mhm.
It is once you have passed a certain threshold that it will actuate the key, and that will send the signal out. So you don't have to bottom out the key and slam it all the way down in, which
Yeah.
kind of gives you a better advantage in terms of typing, gaming, and just the feel of it. It just feels more satisfying.
Thank
And
you for the one in. Oh, sorry.
yeah, and just from like a design perspective, people have gone nuts with the mechanical keyboard
Yes.
and just like making the most elegant looking keyboard you can imagine, but then also going like the other end and just going like nuts with keycaps and like every design, like color, like configuration that
You
you
can
can.
3D print
Yeah.
your own.
Yeah. So you can
Mhm.
have a lot of fun with the mechanical keyboard and like really express yourself through your
Oh yeah,
keyboard.
absolutely. They're expensive in some cases, but they're getting cheaper on the lower end, and they're so nice. They're super worth it. Treat
Yeah.
yourself.
And one
Awesome.
thing you can do, and I was doing this for a while and then I gave up, is a lot of people have keycaps that don't have labels on them of the keys. And it like really forces you to really understand your keyboard and really learn how to type well.
Ooh, that's clever. All right. Well, I mean, thank you for Eric for like the one-on-one situation on keyboards.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I'm sorry I didn't have a little bit more concise of a description there.
All right. I guess like our final accessory that I want to mention is like I guess mice. Um, how does that kind of matter? Does that necessarily matter in terms of getting your setup, or is that like another get what you think is preferred?
So the mouse is actually kind of easy, because a few years ago there were like I think 5 different technologies that were the standard for mice. Back in the 90s, you had the rubber ball mouse, where the mouse would track its movement based on the movement of a ball inside the mouse. And those were extremely unreliable. You had to clean them all the time. It looked like the ball. If you took it out to clean it, it looked like a hard-boiled egg's yolk. There was a huge meme way back when. Um, those kind of fell out of favor uh, for laser mice and visual mice, where the mouse has a sensor inside that effectively uses either a laser or actually what amounts to a very very tiny low pixel camera to determine that it's moving on something. Um, but nowadays, you can get like a really, really good mouse for like $60, which is amazing. Um, but honestly, with all these peripherals, you just buy to your own spec. Again, if you're doing high-end gaming, you're going to go for the more, durable, reliable, and high-performance stuff, which, again, doesn't cost that much anymore compared to what it used to when it was like a premium item. If you're doing office stuff, you don't really need to worry all that much. YouTube, emails, taxes. You know, don't cheap out, but don't go, don't go nuts, right? Don't go crazy. Don't spend like $300 on all these components. Um, but yeah, the mouse is probably tied for keyboard with your direct interface peripherals, because your keyboard is going to do one half of the work, your mouse is going to do the other half of the work. But again, the options, you don't need to worry about it because the best ones are very clearly the best ones based on reviews, reviews on the websites, review scores from reviewers, and in forums, people are going to recommend usually like the same 10 things over and over. For those, in my experience, the best brands are going to be Razer, SteelSeries, and a few others like them. What's the name? Logitech, and a few others like them that they have been holding their place on top for peripherals of mice in particular. Keyboards, there's a lot more brands to talk about. Not gonna go there. Not gonna uncork that bottle. But yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Do you have anything to add, Taylor, on that notion, or?
Nope. I'll just say I personally love my Razer mouse. I like wired mice.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is another factor I saw. It's
That's
like where it's like some are just like wireless and preferred wired, but I guess a common conception I always see is like if wired are always more responsive.
yep.
Yeah, so you're gonna have a higher response rate. You're gonna have no interference, right? You don't have to worry about signals interfering. You don't have to worry about batteries. You don't have to worry about your mouse dying. That has recently been mitigated by companies, a couple of them in particular. I think Logitech and one other brand have come out with it's a mouse and mouse pad combo where the mouse is wireless, but the mouse pad is wired in.
Oh, I know what company. Razer
Mm.
actually does that.
Okay, Razer popped out their own too. That's three. Um, but basically, the pad charges the mouse wirelessly while you use it, and the mouse sends the signal to the pad. Then the pad sends it wired to the computer.
So,
Um,
so it's like wireless charging for phones, but for mice.
yeah, but also for the actual data signal. Um, there's still that teeny chance of interference there, especially with the charging signal and the data signal being kind of intertwined.
Hmm.
But that's the best you're gonna get for wireless, and they're cool. They're really nice. I just prefer wired because I like removing all the variables for interference and failure. Um, so that's just my preference. I think Taylor
Yeah.
hit the nail on the head with that one.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I have one last question, and this goes for both you and Taylor.
Hmm.
Why would you recommend people to even play on PC rather than just sticking to console? Like, what would you stick around for convincing someone to go from console to PC? Like, because there's been a lot of myths that we've obviously debunked of whether, oh, I think a PC is too hard to build. Oh, I think it's really intimidating. I don't think it's really for me per se at times. What would you kind of say to kind of convince someone to break off from any negative stigma towards PC?
So this is my favorite part, honestly, aside from the hardware itself. But all of these kind of tie into why I like the other stuff. Um, PCs offer you a ridiculous amount of utility, customization, and personalization, upgradability, and multitasking. Consoles have kind of taken multitasking, especially the PlayStation 5 and the new Xbox, where you can switch between games on the fly because it caches all this stuff in the background. Background recording and screenshots and whatnot. Um, but the stuff you can do with PCs, it just by and large, just leaps and bounds more than you can do with a console. That's the point, right? Consoles are designed to be really, really good at one thing, and they do it really well. That's the point. PCs are designed to be kind of the does everything machine. Um, so that alone, the fact that you can do so much more with a PC, even a low end PC, is that's just great. That's awesome. But you can have multiple screens, as we've already mentioned. Taylor brought that up. Um, Customization, you can pick all the parts how they look. A lot of people, pick their computer for a particular color scheme, so your whole computer looks one way. You can paint your parts, and it won't ruin anything. Within reason, of course. Do the research on how to do that. Painting your parts, customizing them. You can, obviously put stickers on the outside of your computer. You can, a lot of people put figurines inside their figure, and their computer has a window, so you can see inside. A lot of people do like custom water cooling with custom like liquid colors. So my computer, my color scheme is black and red. Wow, so original, right? But the liquid in the liquid cooling system is red, but it's like a blood red. So it looks like my computer has blood running through it on these clear tubes, and I love it. I
Oh,
geek
that's
out
really
about
cool.
it every time I look inside. Um, and you can do lights, fancy lights, RGB lighting. You can do rainbows. You can make the lighting match your components. You can, some people go crazy and go ultraviolet, like with ultraviolet reactive paint on their stuff. That you can do so much. And then
Alright.
that's just talking about the hardware, right? The software, that's a whole other topic. You can go way, way, way further with the software and customize everything. I have animated backgrounds on my computer. Every screen on my computer has a different video as the wallpaper.
Hmm. Awesome. I'm not trying to cut you off. I also want to just bounce it back to Taylor. I love to hear from
Absolutely,
So,
yeah. No, sorry,
yeah.
I talked too long.
No, no, I all in total agreement. And hey, with a console, you gotta wait for the next gen before there are any changes to your hardware. Guess what? If you build your own PC and you want to change something, you can change something whenever you want, and you can upgrade way faster than you can in the console cycle.
Or
Um,
not if you choose.
or not. Yeah, it's your
Up to
choice.
you.
Yeah, and also just more games. Do you want to play more games? Want to have access to more games?
No
Yeah, that's
PC.
what.
subscription fees for online.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's the one thing I've noticed. A lot of the games are also genuinely cheaper. Some at times compare like
yeah.
I say it's non-AAA. Like a lot of indie games are always cheaper. A lot of genuine
Mhm.
software for PCs is cheaper than say buying like a $60 game each time for a
Oh, and you
console.
don't have to get games through only one avenue, right? You don't have to
Hmm.
buy it through Xbox or PlayStation or whatever. You can buy it. You buy a game, download the standalone installer, go for it, or you can go with Steam or the Epic Store or every company. There's like 8 or 9 different installers and launchers that you can use, but you can get games on multiple software platforms, and they'll generally be compatible with everything else.
Yeah, I think also if you're interested in getting into the world of streaming, Let's Play is so much easier on a
Oh
PC.
my God,
So
yes.
much easier.
I know like PlayStation and Xbox have been trying to implement a consumer-friendly method, but it's still seeing so many road bumps compared to actually like getting like, an Elgato, put it to your PC setup, and then
Hmm.
just call it a day, and you get to work just
Yep.
on your PC.
Yep.
But yeah, no, I think you guys give a lot of a great example. I think the key point I love seeing is the art of customization. I think that's like always a good grabber for me because I think I'm always liking having my own personal pieces of tech be unique to me. Like what Eric was mentioning, you can just create any type of look you want, background, mouse, accessories. It's all catered to you, and I think I think that's my biggest takeaway from what both of you guys are telling me. But thank you. Let's say thank you. Before we wrap up, is there anything either of you want to add towards building PCs? Because I feel like I know we covered a lot in this 1 hour.
I think my biggest thing is do your research and don't be scared. I know that I thought like I would have to be in like a perfect clean white room and like nothing like I've got like so worried that I was going to destroy something and I don't be scared, but also do your research and know what you're getting into.
Yeah. Not. I mean, that's pretty much it. I mean, building your own computer is being familiar with your own computer from then on. Um, Taylor kind of already said what needs to be said. Nothing to be afraid of. The only thing what was the phrase? The quote? The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Yeah.
Your own ignorance is the only thing. Your fear of your own ignorance is what's holding you back, not your ignorance itself. Um, it's the same as people who are afraid of learning how to play the piano, or a teenager learning to drive a car for the first time, or name something that you don't know how to do that seems really complicated, and then you did it, and you're like, wait, what was I afraid of? Same thing. It's a skill. It's just an activity. Excuse me, an activity, a hobby like anything else.
I think it's a good skill to actually have nowadays.
Oh, absolutely. The more
Yeah.
prevalent technology becomes in our world, um, you're leaps and bounds miles ahead of everybody else if you know how to use a computer better than the guy to your left.
Well, awesome. Thank you again, both you, Eric and Taylor. You guys have been tremendous help on a lot of these questions. As just for the viewer audience, Eric's actually helping me build my own PC. So I think I am just I'm in the same shoes as anyone watching who doesn't know anything about PCs. I've always been a console person. So I think talking about this is definitely a good step in the right direction for anyone who wants to do their own research. So I want to say thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you again, Eric, so much for
Thank
helping.
you for having me. I'm always glad to be here. Again, I appreciate that you chose me to be your computer guru that showed up today. Um, and hey, if you want, I'm putting this on the table. We can record and/or stream building your computer when we physically put it all together. If you're
Ooh.
interested.
All right,
Yeah.
I'll
So,
definitely
I mean, I
consider
definitely
that.
have the setup to do that. So,
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much, and thank you again for anyone listening. This has been the Log In Audio Podcast. Hope everyone has a good day and good night. Bye bye.
Bye.
see ya.